At this point, no one should really be surprised. Gimli doesn't like people speaking ill of Galadriel, but if it's your first read, did you like, I don't know, I'd be curious to know. Do you think he would go as far as he did so quickly? Like, that escalated really, really fast. I love that Eomer threatened him and made fun of his height in the same breath. Like, hello everybody, welcome to Aude and Tulava, where we are walking our way through Tolkien's Legendarium, looking for new insights and a greater understanding of the works that we all love. Today we are continuing through the second chapter of Book 3, The Riders of Rohan. As we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, grab a version of the books you don't have in the description below, or join the channel membership community if you would like to support the channel that way. We have a new partnership with the channel. Chapters, Tea and Coffee chapters spring from a passion for story. They set out to elevate the stories we all love by teaming up with independent artists to hand draw beautiful imagery and pair it with specially selected artisanal tea. My favorite is Second Breakfast, of course. Go to drinkchapters.com/Huron and use code Huron15 to get 15% off. I do earn a small commission from every bag sold, so thank you in advance. It's a great way to sit down and enjoy the books we all love. That's drinkchapters.com/Huron and use code Huron15 to get 15% off. All right, let's dive in. We left off last video with the hunters sitting down and waiting for the riders to make their way past. Now the cries of clear, strong voices came ringing over the fields. Suddenly they swept up with a noise like thunder, and the foremost horseman swerved, passing by the foot of the hill and leading the host back southward along the western skirts of the downs. After him they rode, a long line of mail-clad men, swift, shining, fell, and fair to look upon. In pairs they galloped by, and though every now and then one rose in his stirrups and gazed ahead and to either side, they appeared not to perceive the three strangers sitting silently and watching them. The host had almost passed when suddenly Aragorn stood up and called in a loud voice, "What news from the north, Riders of Rohan?" Let's start with the word fell. It is a different word that we don't use very often, really, in this way. From what I can tell, coming from Old English, it means strong, fierce, terrible. And I think it's important to add terrible in that definition. Yes, the Rohirrim are fierce and strong, but if you know the books, you know that they're on the side of good. So how can they be terrible? I know we normally use terrible to denote something bad or distressing, and Tolkien uses it the same way at times as well. He uses terrible about, 60 times, not about, 60 times in fact. And it's all about context. In the next chapter, Treebird says not for a terrible long count of years. He means a distressingly long amount of time. That's how we normally use it. But the other definition is causing or likely to cause terror. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Galadriel was described as terrible when Frodo was seeing the vision of her. She wasn't something bad. She was just so powerful that was something to cause terror. And that's what the three hunters saw in the riders. They were strong and fierce, and their power could cause terror in their enemies, but they themselves were not bad. Tolkien was probably the first person I ever heard use the word this way. And the more I learn about him, I wonder if using terrible in such a way, or fell, in such a way, had its root in his Catholicism. Not to get too into the weeds, but people who have studied the Bible probably understand this. The Bible talks about the fear of God, not in a bad way, like being afraid he's going to punch me, but an extremely healthy respect that comes from knowing the extent of his power. The more I've been reading books about Tolkien and diving into his works closely, the more I see how strongly he believed and how the things he steeped himself in, his religion being one of them, crept into his writing, possibly without him even thinking about it. It just kind of showed up. But I've now since strayed far from the topics I was planning on covering. I was just kind of noticing this as I sat down to write it all. One of the things I love in the passage is how the writers just kind of ride around Legolas and Gimli. There are even riders standing up and checking their surroundings, and they don't see anything until Aragorn stands up and yells at them. They don't really mention them much, but this is another section where we see the cloaks of Lorien doing their magic. I believe I did mention this in the video where they got their cloaks. The elves basically say they're not magic, but all things the elves love are woven into them, which is all the natural things in the woods. So the cloaks are at home in natural places. So on the green grass of the fields of Rohan, they'll be right at home. Now the riders' response to Aragorn is actually pretty impressive. With astonishing speed and skill, they checked their steeds, wheeled, and came charging round. Soon the three companions found themselves in a ring of horsemen, moving in a running circle, up the hill slope behind them and down, round and round them, and drawing ever inwards. Aragorn stood silent, and the other two sat without moving, wondering what way things would turn. Without a word or cry, suddenly the riders halted. A thicket of spears were pointed towards the strangers, and some of the horsemen had bows in hand, and their arrows were already fitted to the string. Then one rode forward, a tall man, taller than all the rest. From his helm as a crest of white horse tail flowed. He advanced until the point of his spear was within a foot of Aragorn's breast. Aragorn did not stir. So we see the skill of the Rohirrim have with horses kind of first and foremost here. They don't just ride their horses to get from one place to another. Horses are really an integral part of how they live and how they do battle. But also very important is the description of the leader of the Rohirrim that they're about to encounter. A man taller than the rest with a crest of white horsetail on his helmet. Hammond and Skull mention a couple of interesting things about this passage. First, if we move over to Unfinished Tales for a moment, we are told that men of Rohan tended to be shorter than the Dunedain, Aragorn's people, because they were more closely akin to other men in their ancestry. But Eomer has a similar height to Aragorn, who's about 6'6". This is because Thengel, Theoden's father, married Morwen from Gondor, who was of high Númenórean descent. Considering Aragorn is of high Númenórean descent, this explains his height as well. The next interesting thing, which I would never know if not for smarter people than me, is this bit about the white horsetail crest on Eomer's helm. Hammond and Skull point us actually to Shippey's Road to Middle-earth, where he says, "A horsetail plume is the traditional prerogative of the Huns and the Tartars and the steppe folk, a most un-English decoration, at least by tradition." Which is a very interesting thing to note because the Rohirrim are quite solidly based on Old English warriors and culture. And as far as I can remember, though I can't find where it's said, the Rohirrim language is really just Old English, not like a language invented by Tolkien. If I'm mistaken, let me know in the comments where I can find the correction. But it's all very interesting that Tolkien, while making the Rohirrim pretty attached to a single culture, still added in little bits like this, horsetail crest. Really just kind of makes the whole scene, it makes it more evocative. It comes alive more. I can see him riding like a great horse, the plume flying out behind him, behind his head, just as the horse actual tail flying behind the actual horse. Almost as if they were like the same kin, rider and steed. Sundered, brought back together to a beautiful symbiotic relationship. After surrounding the hunters, Eomer finally speaks. "Who are you and what are you doing in this land?" said the rider, using the common speech of the West, in manner and tone like to the speech of Boromir, man of Gondor. "I am called Strider," answered Aragorn. "I came out of the north. I am hunting orcs." The rider leaped from his horse. Giving his spear to another who rode up and dismounted at his side, he drew his sword and stood face to face with Aragorn, surveying him keenly and not without wonder. At length he spoke again. "At first I thought that you yourselves were orcs," he said, "but now I see that is not so. Indeed, you know little of orcs if you go hunting them in this fashion. They were swift and well-armed, and they were many. You would have changed from hunters to prey if ever you had overtaken them. But there is something strange about you, Strider." He bent his clear, bright eyes again upon the ranger. "That is no name for a man that you give. Strange too is your raiment. Have you sprung out of the grass? How did you escape our sight? Are you elvish folk?" "No," said Aragorn. "Only one of us is an elf, Legolas from the woodland realm in distant Mirkwood. But we have passed through Lothlorien, and the gifts and favor of the lady go with us." The rider looked at them with renewed wonder, but his eyes hardened. "Then there is a lady in the Golden Wood, as old tales tell," he said. "Few escape her nets, they say. These are strange days. But if you have her favor, then you also are net weavers and sorcerers, maybe." He turned a cold glance suddenly upon Legolas and Gimli. "Why do you not speak, silent ones?" he demanded. Gimli rose and planted his feet firmly apart. His hand gripped the handle of his axe, and his dark eyes flashed. "Give me your name, Horsemaster, and I will give you mine, and more besides," he said. "As for that," said the rider, staring down at the dwarf, "the stranger should declare himself first. Yet I am named Eomer, son of Eomund. I am called the third Marshal of Riddermark." So that's a bit of a longer passage, but I think it was really important to see the first couple of interactions because there's a couple different things we can see. One, Aragorn isn't really giving a ton of information away right up front. He's not lying per se, but he's not exactly going out of his way to tell Eomer everything, which we'll see why in a few paragraphs. What's really interesting to me is how businesslike Eomer is. It's not a lot of wasted politeness or formal welcomes or anything like that. It's who are you? Why are you here? And even when he's trying to come back from the fact that, childhood myths are true, it's a quick acknowledgement and condemnation of Lorien and another quick question to Legolas and Gimli, just poop, poop, back and forth. Obviously, Gimli takes umbrage at Eomer's tone towards Galadriel, and the fact that Eomer answers Gimli the way he does is also super interesting. He doesn't really bluster at the impoliteness of Gimli. He's just in too much of a hurry. I can almost hear him say, "Fine, if this will speed things along, I'll tell you who I am first." At least he takes no umbrage until Gimli threatens him and calls him an idiot. Then Eomer, son of Eomund, 3rd Marshal of Riddermark, let Gimli the dwarf, Glóin's son, warn you against foolish words. You speak evil of that which is fair beyond the reach of your thought, and only little wit can excuse you. Eomer's eyes blazed, and the men of Rohan murmured angrily and closed in, advancing their spears. I would cut off your head, beard and all, master dwarf, if it stood but a little higher from the ground, said Eomer. He stands not alone, said Legolas, bending his bow and fitting an arrow with hands that moved quicker than sight. You would die before your stroke fell. Eomer raised his sword, and things might have gone ill, but Aragorn sprang between them and raised his hand. Your pardon, Eomer, he cried. When you know more, you will understand why you have angered my companions. We intend no evil to Rohan, nor to any of its folk, neither to man nor horse. Will you not hear our tale before you strike? I will, said Eomer, lowering his blade. But wanderers in the Riddermark would be wise to be less haughty in these days of doubt. First, tell me your right name. First, tell me whom you serve, said Aragorn. Are you friend or foe of Sauron, the Dark Lord of Mordor? At this point, no one should really be surprised. Gimli doesn't like people speaking ill of Galadriel. But if it's your first read, did you, I don't know, I'd be curious to know. Do you think he would go as far as he did so quickly? That escalated really, really fast. I love that Eomer threatened him and made fun of his height in the same breath. Look, I'm really mad at you, but you're too short to take seriously. And while we heard about the blooming friendship of Legolas and Gimli and Lórien, and saw little glimpses of it in Parth Galen, here we finally see it kind of in full. Until they became such fast friends, I honestly don't think Legolas would have stood up for Gimli so quickly and so violently, at least threatening violently. I think he would have just tried to talk Eomer down or just let Aragorn step in and deal with it. Instead, he jumps right in and threatens Eomer too. Luckily, cooler heads prevail, and Aragorn gets everybody to just freaking chill out. I could probably chalk the whole thing up to everyone just being really, really tired. I mean, the 3 hunters have been going for days with very, very little sleep, and Eomer and his Ered just had a battle, so tempers are probably a little short, and honestly, that's fine. But Gimli did almost get everybody killed there, so good work, Gimli. Then we get to see why Aragorn was being close with, their whole purpose to Eomer at first. He asked Eomer who they serve, which could seem a little silly because both Aragorn and Boromir did not believe the stories that the Rohirrim were paying tribute to Mordor. But if we think back to the Council of Elrond, Elrond mentions that there have been betrayals before. Aragorn also mentions the prancing pony and Bree. He had to be careful when introducing himself to the hobbits because the enemy had set traps for him before. And at this point, it's not just his life that's at risk, it's 3 of them plus the hobbits that they're trying to free from all the orcs. Luckily, the Rohirrim and Eomer specifically serves Theoden, who we will learn is, his uncle. Eomer throws the question right back at Aragorn, who answers. I serve no man, said Aragorn, but the servants of Sauron I pursue into whatever land they may go. There are few among mortal men who know more of orcs, and I do not hunt them in this fashion out of choice. The orcs whom we pursued took captive 2 of my friends. In such need, a man that has no horse will go on foot, and he will not ask for leave to follow the trail, nor will he count the heads of the enemy save with a sword. I am not weaponless. Aragorn threw back his cloak. The elven sheath glittered as he grasped it, and the bright blade of Andúril shone like a sudden flame as he swept it out. Elendil, he cried, I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and I am called Elisar, the Elfstone, Dunadan, the heir of Isildur, Elendil's son of Gondor. Here's the sword that was broken and is forged again. Will you aid me or thwart me? Choose swiftly. Gimli and Legolas looked at their companion in amazement, for they had not seen him in this mood before. He seemed to have grown in stature, while Eomer had shrunk, and in his living face they caught a brief vision of the power and majesty of the kings of stone. For a moment it seemed to the eyes of Legolas that white flame flickered on the brows of Aragorn like a shining crown. Eomer stepped back, and a look of awe was in his face. He cast down his proud eyes. These are indeed strange days, he muttered. Dreams and legends spring to life out of the grass. So I think at this point, Aragorn has answered his question well and fully. I love the reaction of Legolas and Gimli here. They knew all of this information, but they had never seen Aragorn in this mood before. He was always honest about who he was with the company, but he was never broadcasting it around to everybody and their mom. But not only does he openly declare himself, he gives his prophesied names and pulls his sword and kind of threatens Eomer. Legolas here is seeing with elf sight the unseen world. At least that's kind of how I'm seeing it. He's seeing the power coming through. This is Aragorn's destiny, his fate. Aragorn was ordained by Eru to fill this void, and not only are the words Aragorn is saying important in and of themselves. There's like power coming out of his mouth with the words. At least kind of that's how I'm interpreting Legolas seeing the flames across Aragorn's brow. As Eomer recovers enough to speak again, he asks Aragorn what doom he brings out of the north. The doom of choice, said Aragorn. You may say this to Theoden, son of Thengel. Open war lies before him, with Sauron or against him. None may live now as they have lived, and few shall keep what they call their own. But of these great matters we shall speak later. If chance allows, I will come myself to the king. Now I am in great need, and I ask for help, or at least for tidings. You heard that we were pursuing an orc host that carried off our friends. What can you tell us? That you need not pursue them further, said Eomer. The orcs are destroyed. And our friends? We found none but orcs. But that is strange indeed, said Aragorn. Did you search the slain? Were there no bodies other than those of orc kind? They would be small, only children to your eyes, unshod but clad in gray. Here, I see Aragorn really understanding what is happening in Rohan and with Saruman. He knows Saruman is basically a filthy turncoat, and is trying without saying too much to tell Eomer that no matter what, war and troubling times are coming to their doorstep here in Rohan. Aragorn doesn't know how much Eomer knows or what the political situation is in Rohan, so he's being, I think, still a little vague in his answers. But I also love the way that he says doom is of choice. Choose which side to fight on, but he doesn't even leave it there. He says he'll go to the king later to talk about everything and give them the information they need to make an informed decision for their choice. But he needs to finish the task first. And of course, Eomer didn't see them when they killed all the orcs. But I do love Aragorn reminding him, and kind of in a way Tolkien reminding us, that they were clad in the Lorien cloaks, so they might have just been overlooked. It's almost a slight just kind of reminding Eomer, hey man, I know you're good at your job and everything, but you rode right past us in the daylight and didn't even see us sitting here. It's not meant to hurt him, it's just a reminder that things are happening now Eomer hasn't experienced before, and it's possible he just wasn't ready for that. Of course, Eomer didn't see any dwarves or children while killing all the orcs, but surprised to no one, Gimli has a response. We do not speak of dwarves or children, he said. Our friends were hobbits. Hobbits? Said Eomer. And what may they be? It is a strange name for a strange folk, said Gimli. But these were very dear to us. It seems that you have heard in Rohan of the words that troubled Minas Tirith. They spoke of the halfling. These hobbits are halflings. Halflings, laughed the rider that stood beside Eomer. Halflings? But they are only a little people in old songs and children's tales out of the north. Do we walk in legends or on the green earth in the daylight? A man may do both, said Aragorn, for not we, but those who come after will make the legends of our time. The green earth, say you? That is a mighty matter of legend, though you tread it under the light of day. I think we can excuse a little bit of the initial skepticism at hearing pardon the term, a fairy tale term thrown around like halflings. Legends popping up out of the grass and forcing themselves on you isn't an everyday experience. However, like Aragorn points out, did a legend not do the exact same thing at the beginning of this conversation? Aragorn then popped out of the ground. He's talking about Anduril. The Rohirrim rode right past 3 people sitting on the grass. We're told they obtained their cloaks from the Lady of the Golden Wood, and to top it all off, were threatened by a dwarf, of all people, for speaking ill of an elf. So Aragorn's response is amazing. It's not amazing it's a big comeback. He makes a wonderful point. Isn't the earth a matter of great legend? We're walking directly on a great legend. Pretty existential thought, but what he says before that is actually a little bit more complex. The people who live after us make the legends. So we could be walking in legendary times with legendary people taking part in a legendary moment without knowing it, because we don't know how it's going to play out and how people in the future will view it. And we don't know what legend the Rohirrim have or what legends, but do they know the old stories the way Aragorn does? Probably not as well, but maybe they still hold legends about the sun and the moon, or maybe they have heard of Eärendil. But those are so old they could not possibly be true, right? But I really thought about this until I was writing this. So halflings are children's tales out of the north. Maybe they originated or probably I guess I should say they originated with the ancestors of Gollum, settled near the Anduin, but not too far from the truth, it turns out. Eomer at least will get to meet them and see more legends come to life. But of course, this particular rider doesn't have the open mind Eomer does. Time is pressing, said the rider, not heeding Aragorn. We must hasten south, Lord. Let us leave these wild folk to their fancies, or let us bind them and take them to the king. Peace, Eothane, said Eomer in his own tongue. Leave me a while. Tell the Eorad to assemble on the path and make ready to ride to the Entway. The rider, Eothane, isn't exactly the most open-minded person. Luckily for all, readers included, Eomer is much more involved in the politics of Rohan and understands much better what is going on. He just needs a moment alone to talk with the three hunters so he can make like the most educated decision possible. And that's where we're gonna have to end for today. There's still so much to go over in this chapter. We should be able to finish it next video. Thank you all so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, buy a new version of the book you don't already have in the description, or join the channel membership. And don't forget to claim your 15% off Chapters Tea and Coffee. The book and these videos are best enjoyed with a lovely beverage on hand. And until next time, always remember, Aule and Tulva, day shall come again.